cold and wet, rainy day. Miserable day out. Boys are coming this weekend again. So I'm looking forward to that. So maybe I'll just take a minute, tell you about this room I'm working on. This was the first room I worked on. It was one of the first rooms I really needed to get cleaned up. Bought the house almost 3 years ago. And before I moved in, I had to get the demolition done in the part we were going to live in initially. The upstairs was not in any shape to live in. It had an open window. I boarded that up and put most of our belongings upstairs and just left them in boxes. This room is where you come in and out, and so it was probably going to be one of the most used rooms by us, and it was. So there was an urgency to get this room livable to some degree as quickly as possible.
Welcome to the Rundown Reborn channel.
So we had the front room to live in, this room that I'm in right here, the dining room. We had these side rooms of the house that were originally 2 bedrooms, and the boys were in one of them, and that became their bedroom for most of the first year. The front room became a second bedroom. Then this space was our living room. We had the TV in here, the sofa, and this was the place that we hung out in for the most part for going on 2 years or more. Now initially, I had to get this room ready for occupation. And there was a lot of stuff I needed to do to this room to get started. I had a front door that needed replaced. I had 2 windows here on the side that really needed replaced. They were drafty and just had a lot of problems. So I really focused on trying to get the house enclosed and get those windows and doors that were critical to our living space replaced as quickly as possible. And that also made the house more secure as well. Then once I had the weather and the security in place, then I could focus on the interior. And the first step was to get those floors leveled. This house had a lot of unevenness. The front corner of this house, right there by the front door, had settled almost 2 inches or maybe even 3. So there was a considerable amount of slope across the house, from the back corner of the house to the front corner of the house. It was a diagonal slope pretty much. It tended to be level at the center of the house, but as you move closer and closer to the front corner of the house towards the street, we had that fall off. So I needed to make that up. Now there was a concern, is there a substantial structural problem underneath the house with the foundations? And I investigated that initially. I knew the house was uneven. I could see it. You could feel it when you walked on it. So when I was buying the house, I did go in the basement and I inspected that. And I did find that the wall and that corner of the house had been reinforced with new masonry, and there had been some work done on the foundation. So I felt good about that. But the house had settled. The primary cause of that settlement was poor roof drainage. Rainy days like this, over half the house drains to that front corner of the house, and that created a soft soil condition, and over time, this house settled. I've remedied that now. I've got gutters in place. They're spilling out and draining underground out to the street. No longer an issue. So that all said, my problem's been resolved, but I still had the problem. I had an uneven floor. What's the solution? Most people will say, just jack the house up, stick the shims under, level the whole house. There's a problem with that. These old houses, it doesn't necessarily all slope in one direction. As I was checking the level, I mean, it was all over the map. I mean, there was settlement in this corner, it would fall back, it would raise, valley. You know, it was going in multiple directions. to raise the house and try to do it with jacks and shims and stuff, major overkill. So I needed to come up with a new solution. I didn't have one. I thought about it for a while, and that's when I decided I'm going to just top level it. Now I looked into self-leveling cement, and there's a problem with that. There's a considerable amount of weight that's involved with pouring concrete on a wood structure. My floor joists are only 2x8s. That's not a substantial floor structure. It's enough. The spans aren't very long, and it's been holding up for more than 120 years. There's some flex, there's some bow, there's a little bit of sag, but it's nothing that I really need to be overly concerned about, structurally speaking. So I still have the problem of the uneven floor. I really don't want to live in a downsloping house. It's just uncomfortable. So faced with this problem, I had to come up with an idea that would create a level floor with minimal impact. And what I came up with was basically to just put a new subfloor on top and float that. And I went about that by ripping 2x4s down and sloping the bottom side of those 2x4s in the contour of the floor at that certain location. I set those perpendicular to the floor joists and spaced them out at 16 inches on center. That gave me a new level nailing surface that I could then attach my tongue and groove 3/4 inch deck. And you will not believe at how much more rigid and level my floors ended up being at the end of that. It was absolute game changer. With those new level floors, a new surface in place, the dirt was starting to disappear. I still had a lot of open studs with a lot of coal soot stuck to them. This house was a coal-fired furnace initially. And as I was doing the demolition, that soot was everywhere behind that plaster. You mix that soot with that plaster dust, and it was filth, absolute black filth. So now that I had all of that demo out, all the dirt was gone. It's been removed. I pulled the old carpet that was just disgusting. I left it in place while I was doing demolition so that it would catch most of that dirt. I was able to then pull up the carpet, drag it out, and most of the dirt went with it. That left me with a lot of open studs and a fresh bare skeleton to start working with. As I was moving in, I kept that U-Haul for an extra day. I don't have a pickup truck. So I took that U-Haul to the home improvement store and put about 20 sheets of drywall in it, along with some studs, and brought that on back, unloaded it, and returned the U-Haul. So with that drywall and studs, I started working out some basic framing. I had already laid out the floor plan. When I initially visited this house, I took measurements, and I was able to go back and develop a floor plan as I waited for the closing to all occur. That way, once I was inside, everything had been figured out. Now in this room, the dining room, this is the heart of the house. It's atypical. These are old houses. Back at the turn of the century, people lived a different way. There was no television. I mean, your method of entertainment was primarily just having guests. That's why there were a lot of porches. People would sit out on the porches. There was no air conditioning. So you get a nice summer breeze, hang out on the porch, wave to your neighbors, visit, communicate, socialize. Nice, bigger, fancy homes, the rich, they had themselves a parlor room. Now these parlor rooms were basically spaces that were much more formal in character. They had nicer finishes. That's where you spent your money. You put your nice furniture in there, and that's where you had your guests over. The guests didn't really go into the rest of the house. The rest of the house was considered a private space. This house, like many houses of the time, had two front doors. There was the front door into the living room, and there was a front door into this room that I'm in, that's currently the dining room. Now I had a choice. I could use either door. I could enter into my living room, or I could enter into my dining room. And that was something I thought about. It's not ideal to come into your house and arrive in a dining room. It's awkward. But I'm dealing with this house, this pre-existing plan, and I had to just make a decision. So I thought about it, and I decided to leave the front door where it was and enter into this space, the dining room. There was a couple reasons for that. I wanted to maintain the living room to be kind of its own space. I wanted to preserve that space as a contained room. This room already had circulation problems. It's in the center of the house. I've got a master bedroom off to this side, the living room off to the front, and the kitchen behind me into the next space. This kitchen and dining room relationship, to get that modern open plan, I did open that space up wide open. There's a lot more time spent in a kitchen these days. That's where families congregate. Back in the day, kitchens were considered utilitarian. You just don't hang out in the kitchen. It was functional use only. It was there, you go in, prep the meal, come in, bring it into a dining room, and eat as a family there. Today, it's a lot more loose. I mean, you still want to sit down for a meal, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen in a formal setting. But we're dealing with a formal house design that had compartmentalized room uses. Today's modern house, room uses have multi-functions, and people want to flow throughout the house and use all of the rooms for various reasons. So with this dining room, I already had that circulation problem. This room is the hub of the entire downstairs. All the rooms connect into it as well as the front door. So I had to maintain some openness for circulation. And when doing that, there's just not a lot of extra space for furniture. So with this room, I've got basically two corners to work with. I've got a corner by the front door, which has about a 2-foot recess, which is plenty of space for some small piece of furniture there. I've got this corner behind me, and this is a nice space for some sort of corner table or any other sort of piece of furniture. And then we've got the chandelier overhead. We'll be able to drop and rest right over top of the table, perhaps a nice rug underneath it. I'm planning to do wood laminate floors in this space. Then over here, near the kitchen, is a blank wall. That's a perfect spot for some sort of buffet piece of furniture or perhaps a curio cabinet. And then in this last corner, I've got the log stove platform that I've just recently built. That stove will sit on top of there, and there in the corner niche, I'll be able to have cabinet and some coat hooks. And that was the idea in this room. I wanted to create a room that had multi-functions as both a dining room and a receiving room upon entry of the home. It becomes a place to drop your purse, drop your bags, do your homework, have dinner, hang out, do a jigsaw puzzle, whatever. The log stove is in here, creates a hearth that otherwise doesn't exist. The nice thing about these log stoves, they're ventless. You no longer need to vent these to the outside, so you can pretty much put them anywhere you want. You just need to run a gas line to it and have an outlet to plug it in. Now the outlet is optional. The reason I have an outlet is because it's got a blower fan on the back of it. Why a blower fan? That blower motor triples or even quadruples the amount of heat output of that stove. Initially, when we moved in, we did not have any type of heat or air conditioning in this house. There was no central furnace. The stove provided heat for that first winter and even some of the second winter. By that time, we did have central heat installed, but that stove allows us to provide a little makeup heat, or perhaps if it's drafty in the morning, you can kick that on, warm up the room quickly, and it costs a lot less to run that gas stove than it does to heat the entire house. So it's a nice way to provide some auxiliary heat to reduce the energy consumption overall of the house. And for the ceiling, I could have just drywalled the whole ceiling and been done with it. But, you know, a drywall ceiling is kind of boring. And I wanted to do something a little bit interesting. I was bringing down the ceiling anyway to provide a little bit of soffit to work with. But, you know, I mean, I could have brought the whole ceiling down and just been done with it, but I wanted to go ahead and leave that recess up there. I used those acoustic panels, and that provides a little bit of dampening to the acoustics in this room. It's not so echoey, but it also creates just an architectural feature of the space. Having that recessed ceiling up there and the trims around it will provide just a little bit more visual drama to the space, a little bit more intimate character of the space, and a little bit more visual interest in the space. It doesn't cost a whole lot more as far as material goes. It's a lot more labor, but if you're doing your own labor, that's really not an issue. So for not more than a few $100s worth of extra material, some trim boards, a little bit more expensive ceiling finish, I didn't do the whole ceiling in that, just a little bit, just enough to give it some character. And it frames the chandelier just wonderfully. It accentuates the circulation corridor with the recessed lighting, and it just pulls it all together. So it's my goal here to try to finish this room by the end of the month. Once that's finished, I won't be doing the flooring right away. I still need to finish the kitchen before I can start laying flooring and a few other things. But having the paint on the walls, having the trims up, having it cleaned up and visually finished makes all the difference. It starts providing that sense of home, that sense of livability, and it's one more room that gets wrapped up. I want to get this room painted. Paint's the last step. I'm not far away. I've got a little bit more sanding to do, get these walls polished up nice and smooth. So come along for the process. Go ahead, subscribe, leave a like if you like the ideas, leave a comment if you have any questions, thoughts, suggestions. I like them all. But I appreciate you watching this one. I hope it was interesting. Make the best of a good rainy day. We'll see you in the next one.